Hi, Subomi.
Hello.
Thank you so much for honoring our invitation to come on our show today. Recently, you wrote this article on the Nigerian sexuality problem.
Yeah.
Or the sexuality problem in Nigeria. And there was a statement you made that literally shouted at me. And you said, Nigerians are obsessed with sex.
Yes, we are.
What we pretend about it.
Yes.
How so?
Well, I guess because I follow the stats. I typically chart our behavior, especially online. And I got a bit alarmed when over the last 10 years, our searches for sex and porn online just kept spiking. And it was interesting that, in those years, we've kind of overtaken the US in terms of searches for porn online.
Wow.
And I mean, that's a nation that is 3 times our size, so you can imagine the kind of volumes we're looking at. That's also a nation that has better broadband penetration than we have. So I just came to the conclusion that it's a subject we're very interested in. Perhaps we search for it online because we don't have places where we can readily ask questions or explore or have honest and open conversations about it. So it may be curiosity. It may just be the fact that when broadband came to Nigeria, it kind of opened the floodgates. So it could have been a topical area we were always interested in, but we just didn't have access. And now that we have access, it's like Father Christmas has come to town, and we're just really exploring. So that's kind of like why I wrote the article.
Okay. Now, for a nation that is highly spiritual, because we always think, Nigerians are like the most religious people, and to a large extent, we believe that we're more moral, quote and unquote, than the West, so the America. So how do you think that this kind of culture has come upon us and is actually even getting worse than these countries in the West?
Okay, it's interesting you mention it because the data suggests that the more religious a nation is, the greater their porn consumption.
Oh, wow.
So the state of Utah in the US, which is comprised of 63% Mormons, they have the highest amount of porn searches in the US.
Okay.
There's data that was just released 2 weeks ago that suggests about 69% of church-going men in the US indulge in online pornography. So it just tells me that religion or focus on morality sometimes creates a hidden form of sexual expression. So people are not as open as they should be about their sexual desires or sexual expression, and so they tend to do things in the dark. Also because if you realize that from morality, they'll tell you that sex outside of marriage is wrong. Now I'm neither here nor there about it. I'm just speaking in data terms. So it tells me that if sex outside of marriage is wrong, then a lot more people would then use porn as a substitute. So they kind of rationalize it that since I can't go out and have sex with a member of the opposite sex, then I might as well, satisfy that or ease that frustration through alternative means, and porn and masturbation would be an alternative. So that could also be part of the reason why we see such high spikes with pornography use, in religious or moral
societies.
circles. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Now, the thing is, why do you think, and again, possibly because we're religious, why do you think that the church is running away from discussing these issues? I for example, teach teenagers, and we have a manual we use for the year. And I always say this, and I said, look, if my church knows what I tell these teenagers, is either have two things: they either change the curriculum or they fire me as a teenage teacher forever. Why do you think the church is really conservative and pretending like, nothing is happening, everything is fine, we're okay, we're very moral, that's for the people in the world, we're good?
Because if you look at the doctrinal stance of the church, any discussion that is about sex or liberality or what have you is deemed a sin or deemed inappropriate. So it's just the way we look at it. And anytime you have a very legalistic structure, people then shut up and tend to do what they want to do in silence. So it's almost like you have a hypocritical culture. On the outside, People appear to be moral, so to speak, and then at home, when no one is looking at them, they then do whatever they want to do. So that's usually what happens in a very regulated society. It's not just a religious society, any society where you have a huge focus on regulation or legalism, you tend to have a very, very hypocritical society.
Speaking of regulation, it was shocking for me to see that Nigeria has the third largest Google searches on gay porn in a country that actually has banned what gay marriage. And even more shocking for me was the fact that Enugu actually has the highest rate in the whole country. How is that even possible? Because I did my personal vox pop, so I asked a few people, more than a few people actually, everybody I met since I read the data, and most people said, oh, it has to be the north, it has to be the north. And when I said Enugu to everybody else, they were shocked. In fact, but there was this particular young man who said to me, Labo, oh my God, do you know what you just said made sense? Anytime I go to a club in Enugu, in some weird way, there's always some guy whose hand brushes my bum. He said, I can't explain it, but now that you have said it, I'm never going to that city again. So there's a disconnect. There's obviously a disconnect.
I mean, there is a disconnect, again, like I said, where you have a heavy regulation of something. Without going to the root cause or explaining to people why the regulation is necessary and generally getting a buy-in from the people, you then find people doing things in secret. So it doesn't solve the problem. It just means that people then do it in secret. And I tell people that porn is not the problem. For a lot of people, porn is a solution.
A solution to what problem?
I'm going to explain. In the US, there's this doctor called Clotaire Raphael. He did a research on obesity in the US and found that for a lot of people, they assume obesity is a problem. But he then found that for quite a lot of people, obesity was a solution. It was a solution to depression. It was a solution to loneliness. It was a solution to unwanted advances, say, by your mother's boyfriend. So in the same vein, porn is a solution for a lot of people. It's a solution to maybe sexual frustration, sexual curiosity, depression. You have a huge population of young people that are at home. They're not working. Some people have spent 2 years at home doing nothing. Now, when you're completely idle and depressed by your lack of job prospects, chances are you tend to look for what it is that is going to give you an instant high. For some people, it may be food. For some people, it may be sex. And then for some people, it may be pornography or masturbation. So unless you get to the root cause of the issue, you're just going to be putting out fires. So if our unemployment rates don't reduce, if people don't get jobs, if people don't feel fulfilled and validated, if people feel that talking about sex is immoral, if people feel that just having a good time and going out for socials is immoral, then where does all that energy go to? Yeah.
How does one define boundaries when it comes to sex or porn? At what point do you say, okay, you know what, this is safe, and now this is becoming an addiction?
Okay. Well, I'll go by the expert's definition of addiction, as opposed to just giving my opinion.
It's fine.
Addiction is usually defined as a compulsion, something that is now out of your control. So when you find someone watching porn and they say, I don't want to do it, I think this is bad for me, but they find themselves continuously watching it, and it's usually accompanied by feelings of guilt and shame, and it's compulsive. It's something that they could be working and then they hurriedly excuse themselves from a meeting to go to the bathroom to jerk off. At that point, it's become an addiction because it's not something that you can control. It's eroding your willpower. That's usually what is defined as addiction. For people who engage in porn or sex recreationally, you find they don't have any problem with guilt. It's not something they think about But once it's associated with guilt, with shame, with compulsion, you can't stop yourself, from doing it. At that point, you've crossed into addiction.
Okay. What resources are available to people who have sexual problems in Nigeria?
Okay, there are quite a number. I mean, we've on our part, and by we I say Jack and Jill.
Okay.
We've provided a platform where people can go and talk to real therapists. So what we've done is we've collated 13 professionally licensed counselors and therapists in Nigeria. So these are all licensed professionals, and they've given an hour of their time free. So you can actually go to that platform, www.tinyurl.com/jjtherapy, and you can actually just book for any therapist of your choice. So within that 1 hour, at least they'll be able to get a sense of what's happening to you. You can ask any question, and then at your discretion, you can then book a follow-up session if you want to. So that's a platform. It's kind of like a safe space.
Okay.
That we've provided. You can also send us an email as well. So that way, if you have a question, if you're not sure whether you're addicted or whether you're just a recreational user, you can actually just send an email as well via that platform, and you'll get a response and some guidance and advice on what's happening to you.
Okay. Is there any country, and for someone who does a lot of research, is there any country that's had this kind of issue with porn, and have they been able to solve it in any way? Do you know?
Well, there are a number of interventions. So the UK, for example, has commissioned research for their legislators to look at on how they can counter the porn problem. If you go to YouTube, there's a documentary called Porn on the Brain that kind of captures what the UK is trying to do to mitigate porn. Now, what they're trying to do is to force companies that produce porn, because you can't really go against their fundamental rights, to produce porn. You can't go against the fundamental rights of porn actresses and actors to participate in that industry. So what they're trying to do is to at least limit access to minors, because that's really where the issue is. Once you're over 18, I can't tell you what to do.
That's true.
If you decide you're going to indulge in porn, it's your fundamental human right. But what they're trying to do is for minors who don't already have a frame of reference for sex. So you can imagine for a 15-year-old, your first exposure to sex is porn. Nobody tells you that this is unrealistic and that this doesn't happen in real life. So they're trying to target those young people, the minors, and then forcing producers of porn to kind of gate their online resources. So if you're not over 18, you shouldn't have access, and you can be prosecuted. The producers can be prosecuted. The ISPs, the internet service providers, can actually be prosecuted, for not properly creating gates, to those platforms for minors. So that's as far as they've gone. They're also trying to advocate for education, as well, so that if people are curious about sex, instead of going to Google, to find out that there are licensed resources, licensed therapists and counselors that you can actually just contact online if you have questions about your sexuality or you're just curious, about sex. So that's what, developed countries have been trying to do.
Is it that the Nigerian government is in denial of what should I call it now? Should I call it a porn movement? Because I don't even know what to even refer to it as. Or people are ignorant of what's going on. Because to be honest, if you tell me, and if I didn't see the stats and I knew you were a data analyst, you're very in on data, there's no way I can believe that Nigeria's appetite for pornography is higher than the United States of America. There is no way. No way.
I think part of the problem is we don't measure things a lot in Nigeria, and we don't really respect data. So even when there's a problem, people are not measuring it. So that's why they're not aware, and because they're not aware, they don't consider it important. And also because for something like porn, it takes maybe 5-10 years for you to begin to see the negative impact. So as those people begin to form relationships, as those people begin to have children, as maybe rape cases begin to rise, then you see the result. But because it's not an immediate problem. You can't see the impact now. That's why a lot of times it's easier to ignore. After all, it's something people do in the privacy of their homes. They're not hurting anyone, so it's easy to ignore it because it's not being done in public, but when it now becomes a public issue and it begins to affect maybe other spheres of society, other spheres of relationships, maybe at that point people would then, but by that time it's too late.
It's too late.
Because you're then dealing with addiction. You're not just dealing with in indulging in watching porn, which, like I said, once you're above 18, that's your fundamental right.
So how do we solve this problem now? What are the solutions?
We need to give people safe places where they can ask about sex. That's one. Where they don't feel condemned, where they can just ask, a professional or someone they trust, a mentor, and they have real answers. Not coded, coded answers.
Come on.
And then at a government level, because it's really only government and maybe entrepreneurs that can solve this, we need jobs. We need to get our young people busy. We need to give our young people hope, because if they have hope that Nigeria is changing, Nigeria is getting better, there's a future, for them, then perhaps they wouldn't be so depressed that they would need the escape.
In several countries in the world, you notice that companies actually fund different causes.
Yes.
But is it just in Nigeria that most companies would rather spend millions on artists and millions on events and millions on TV and actually not fund causes like this?
Okay, I think it depends on. Usually, it's maybe the head of the company that has maybe a personal passion, and decides to put money into that endeavor, that platform. So, for example, Jack and Jill is being funded by Alder Consulting.
Okay.
So there's actually a corporate sponsor for Jack and Jill. So sometimes I find it's an entrepreneur. I know GT Bank is doing a lot with autism.
Yes.
So there's some organizations that maybe just pick a cause and that they have a passion for, and they fund. I hope a lot more companies will understand that they play the role of interventionists. I talked about interventions, that government can't do everything. Government is also not aware of everything. Yeah. So at some point, it's going to fall on corporate organizations who understand these issues, and maybe the entrepreneurs behind those organizations have a passion for these issues. I often say this, that it's one thing to train up your child well in Nigeria. So you say, I don't want my child to be involved in what's happening, in Nigeria, the corruption and the 419 and the promiscuity and all of that. But I tell parents that once you've trained your child, they're still coming back to the same culture. Yes. It's out of that culture they're going to marry. It's out of that pool that they're going to go to work, that they're going to go to school. So you can shield your child as much as you like, but they're still going to operate within that culture. So if you don't solve the culture, then your child is also an endangered species, and that's just the way it goes.
Do you think now, the case of the chicken or the egg, there's the definition, or there's the belief that the society makes the person, but the person is from a family now. The family makes society. What do you think is best? Because I believe the family, from the family to the society and then back.
Well, the data doesn't support that.
Okay.
It's the elite that creates society.
Oh, really?
Yes.
How so?
The people who control the ideas, the ideology of a society. So by the elite, it could be the people that write the policies. Because remember, with one stroke of the pen, a governor can determine your life.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So at that point, it's not your family. It's the elite. So it's whoever controls the levels of power, the levels of media. So celebrities also creates a culture, which is why I said our music culture is an Olamide or an Afro hip hop culture. It's not a King Sunny Ade culture, because what is relevant now. So those are the people defining your children's taste in music, whether you like it or not. They determine your children's taste in music. So it's the elite that create culture, not the family. Because like I said, no matter what you teach your child, in private, he's going to spend a larger percentage of his life in the real world.
Wait, this is serious, though.
It is.
Because there's so much a parent can actually do.
It is, because it's not every child that has their, like I said, Nigeria is not an individualistic culture. It's a communal culture, so peer pressure dominates. It's when you're individualistic, you're looked down on. You're said to be rebellious.
You're weird. Yeah.
You're said to be weird.
Yeah.
You're said to be off.
Yeah.
So we don't celebrate individualism, which is why entrepreneurship is so hard. Because once you try to be different, once you try to be innovative, you're looked at as, strange.
Yeah. Now, this is obviously not your core work. I mean, you're a brand strategist, but you have taken time out to be involved in so many causes. One of the causes you were involved in was to save Mirabel, the only rape crisis center in Lagos that was almost shut down because of lack of funds. You've been involved. You've been involved in several initiatives, and in a country where everybody just goes, "I beg, it's not affecting me and my family." That's you people's business. Am I the government? See how the people are balling now. Now, how did you get to the level of, as a responsible citizen of society, I want to help? Is that how you've always been? How did you get to this level?
I think it's just the belief that every life is precious. In Nigeria, because we see dead bodies on the road, a lot. You get numb and you feel that human life is dispensable. But I tend to believe that every human life matters. Every human life is important, and what I've learned is that in society you will always have interventions. So Mirabel Center is an intervention. It can't cure or solve the problem of treating victims of child abuse. Incidentally, 70% of their patients are under the age of 18. Which
70%?
70% of the rape cases, they're under the age of 18. So people are raping children. But that's another matter entirely. So for me, I see those things as interventions. They can't solve, one rape crisis center in the whole of Lagos can't solve the problem, but it's an intervention that can save maybe 100 lives, and for me, those 100 lives matter. So it's not the scale, it's just the fact that if I can help 100 people, I'm happy. So that's why I get involved, because I can't take on the problem of Nigeria, but at least I can take on the problem of one person at a time, one family, and hopefully advocate for more people to then come on board, join hands, and also support.
Okay. Now I just have to ask you a few questions to end this. Now you're a very, very deep thinker, so I hope you can answer this question for me. A friend of mine had asked me once. He was one of those people who we believe in Nigeria together, and he's really tired. And he asked me, he said, Labo, the Japanese are good at robotics, Chinese at processes, Indians at IT, the Dutch at water technology or any energy saving technology. What are Nigerians good at except resilient in adversity? So Subomi, help me answer that question. What do you think Nigerians are known for and good at generally?
I think Nigerians have a natural instinct for business.
Okay.
I think we've kind of been blessed with that instinct where you put money into our hands and we're able to then multiply it through entrepreneurial opportunities. So I think that's an inherent strength. Unfortunately, because we've not had a lot of places where we can express that talent. We don't have the kind of government support that we want to. So I think that's something Nigerians are good at. And if given enough of opportunity, Nigerians, can become the best, in the world, in any industry. We've all heard stories of Nigerians going abroad and, shining because the environment is conducive, for them. So that tells me we have it inherently. We just need an enabling environment, and then that talent will shine.
Cool. Then what's the best advice you've ever been given?
Okay. That's a bit difficult. If it's work related, the best advice I've ever been given is that you should learn to enjoy the things you don't like to do, so that you can afford to do the things you like to do. That's, I think, the best business advice or work advice that I've been given. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for your time. I'm really thankful you came.
My pleasure.
All righty.
What else? Where else should I?
No, I think we're good. So that it's not. Yeah. Yeah, I think we're good.
Yeah, so that I don't put you on the eye. Did you do your makeup yourself? Oh wow. I still haven't. So I don't know how to do eyeshadow still. All of us.
Keep it.
So are you still going to do?
Don't mind that.